You're listening to the Perth Property Show, Australia's only weekly property podcast by West Australian experts for West Australian listeners. Catch your latest episode every Monday at 7 a.m.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Perth Property Show. My name's Trent Fleskens, your host as always. This week we have a special episode. I've been able to drag Brendan Ptolomey back into the studio pre-Christmas, outside of our usual quarterly updates, to have a conversation proactively around trying to make sure that we aren't in this situation in 2031. I think it's pretty obvious that 2026 is going to look very similar to 2025, with the one hold being global events that we are unaware are about to happen. But when you think on a micro level, it looks very obvious to us on this table that 2026's dynamics are unfortunately look very similar to 2025. Instead of reflecting on that and complaining about it and pointing it out, we thought we'd spend some time putting our heads together, reflecting on how we might actually, as a community, be able to improve the situation over time. Brendo, thanks for your time again, mate.
Yeah, Trent, thanks for having me in, mate. It's great to be here and great to talk about something a bit more structural, maybe do a little bit more problem solving or throwing around a few more ideas other than just talking about how crazy the property market is.
Right, and as an update on where the property market's at, we are still sitting at around 3,000 properties on the market.
Yep.
A balanced one's 13,000.
Yeah.
The worst it got was 17,000.
Yeah.
We thought last year, when we hit 5,500, that we'd be heading in the right direction again towards a balanced market. In fact, we're lower than the low last year.
Yeah, and we've been under 2,000 single residential dwellings available on the market for most of this year, which is a crazy idea.
It's not tenable, and what happens is mobility just goes out the window. The people that need mobility, first home buyers and downsizers, they're the ones who suffer the most from a lack of mobility. They're the ones that are suffering the most from this situation.
Yep.
That's that reality. We're still bringing in about 75,000 people a year. They need about 30-ish thousand new homes. We're building 21. And that's as good as it's been, actually, in terms of that ratio for the last 5 years.
Yeah, we got a pat on the back for getting to 21,000.
Yeah, we were the best of the shit, essentially, in terms of our productivity and ability to solve a problem that, to be fair, is not our doing. We don't determine how many people come into this state and need a roof over their head as a basic need. The federal government does that. We just have to deal with what we get. And because we're doing so well as an economy, because we're such an attractive place to live, we're getting the lion's share as a percentage of immigration, and no one could keep up with this.
No, absolutely. And we also need the percentage of people that come in, migrating into WA from the East Coast or overseas, with a skill set to help us with this crisis that we've got. We still need those people coming here.
What we know is that the amount of people who are actually here that can help is less than 5% of those people.
Yeah.
That's mental. What is everyone else doing coming here? Is it just grandmas?
It's a very good question, and we could really do with some help from the federal government in terms of classifying those people and making sure that they absolutely have the skill set that we require.
Is this our first point of what we could be doing to help fix this problem right now? Is not stopping immigration, that sounds xenophobic, but being very deliberate with the federal government about, if you're going to come, you've got to contribute and help the problem, not make the problem worse.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about that skill set. One of the things I've noticed in the uptick in the activity that we're experiencing, this boom versus last boom, is I've been hearing most recently in the last month or so as just project managers. This sector of the marketplace in terms of employment was described to me as the white-collar construction workers, so the people that manage the projects and get them out of the ground. Unfortunately, the pressure on that sector continues to go through the roof because the state government have decided to build or renovate some hospitals. And so suddenly we need a whole lot more of those people either to design that or manage that project.
And then build it, which is competing with the people building our homes right now. And look,
absolutely.
It is, again, that is the other basic need, really, is that hospital care. That is the second biggest critical issue in Western Australia, so you can't leave that on the wayside.
No.
It would have been nice if it was done instead of the Yanchep train station or the Canning Vale train station, to be frank. That money would have been the same.
Yeah.
But it's got to get done, and all it's going to do is continue to make the cost of supplying new land more expensive again. The cost of sand is double what it was 5 years ago. Limestone blocks, double what it was 5 years ago. These are the things that we need in the land that's being developed right now, and that just means land is getting close to double what it was 6-7 years ago in terms of its cost. So the first one there is, John Kerry, please speak to the federal immigration minister, Tony Burke, about what he's planning to do on who comes into this state. Not how many, but who?
Yep. And also, I would encourage the state government to go hard in terms of advertising campaigns in the East Coast again. We're not going to get anyone out of Queensland. They're all going to start building for the Olympics. New South Wales, I think there's a chance that you can distract some tradies out of New South Wales in terms of lifestyle proposition. And most importantly...
Cost of living.
Yeah, Melbourne, Victoria is a huge chance for us. They're coming out of a lot of tradies in that marketplace, coming out of significant government projects. We should be going to them in terms of advertising cost of living here, better wages here, and a much better lifestyle, and trying to attract them across the country.
Let's turn our focus to the local governments. What we do know as developers, people in the industry, is that local government planning risk is one of the biggest risks facing developers when it comes to doing any sort of infill. Urban expansion, not so much. There's not that many people complaining about it. There's not that many neighbours. When it comes to infill and apartments, it's huge. And I think there's two layers to this. One is how many people have a say, and that comes down to decision making. A lot of that's already started to transition away from the local councils, not the cities, not the offices, the councils, but also how many councils there are. Now, you've spoken about this before. Yep. The amount of councillors there are in the western suburbs, for example, where a lot of people would love to live if they could have an opportunity, versus maybe the city of Melville.
Yeah. So if we relate councillors back to population, by my count, and this has changed slightly recently, mainly because of the fact that the City of Nedlands has gone from 12 or 13 councillors down to 3 because they all got sacked. But if we set that aside, before they were taken out of the market, so to speak, between UWA and the Fremantle Traffic Bridge, there's 63 councillors operating in the western suburbs, and I'm including town of Cambridge in there as well, going a little bit further north. And I just venture to people, if you're trying to get anything done, if you're trying to run a business, run a school, run a community development, run a community sporting organisation, something like that, if you've got a large amount of people on a committee, it slows down decision making. And there's that old joke about the best committee is a committee of one, and maybe some people really like that idea. I'm not suggesting that's the case here. All I'm suggesting is that if we're trying to get progress in these locations and come up with ideas and evolve a discussion, then having the same councillors come back every single year and having 63 of them around with an opinion isn't going to move us forward anywhere, because each of those 63 is representing, on average, a couple of thousand people. I think it's just way too many people and oversaturated, and it costs a lot of money to run. Each of those councils has a CEO, has a CFO, has a COO, has people managing operations.
Health
I know
and
they
safety.
share some assets and bits and pieces. They're really expensive places to run. And then you go down to City of Melville, which has essentially those 63 councillors are looking after 100,000 people. City of Melville's got, I think, 10 councillors, and they've got the same population, 100,000 people there. So why do we need those two different models? Why can't we move on to having the same model north of the river as to south of the river?
Or we think about the cost of rates continually going up. Well, one of the biggest factors is salaries. Right?
Absolutely.
We don't need to be paying that many people to have duplicated jobs. And that's something that I would have thought in what is essentially an autocratic government right now in Western Australia, where if they wanted to, and often they can do what they want, and especially, to be frank, in a location that isn't supported by the Labor government for the most part, this is the time you'd be merging these guys. And I'm not just talking about the western suburbs. There's a number of cities out there that just don't need to be separate. Look at Fremantle. There doesn't need to be an East Fremantle and a Fremantle. Bassendean and Swan, really? What are we achieving there as well? So there's opportunities, I think, to save on rates for starters, not really a housing problem, but more importantly, start to reduce the amount of decision makers. And then when you've got less of them, you probably increase the quality of them. And this is where I want to then go on to our third point, which is, let's be honest, why are the local doctor, journalist, retiree,
landowner / developer,
whoever it is, why do they have the prerogative to be making development decisions with their total lack of experience at a local government, local council level? And we've seen that be taken away very pragmatically by John Kerry and Rita Saffioti over the last 5-6 years, progressively taking a lot of those decisioning rights away from local councils and bringing them into a state level. I'm a big believer that the local city officers should be assessing in terms of preparing reports, because they understand the local nuances and it's a good resource to be able to use, right? But then the decisioning should be done by a professional and only professionals. And that's state development units, that's commissioners, that's JDAPs. At no point in time in the future should we even be asking the local council, which is made up of the physio down the road and the local green grocer, whether we should be approving a apartment development or not. Come on.
Yeah, and the irony of what I've always found with reading through the articles about the planning meetings at a council session is that the council are paying a qualified planning professional to review an application, whether it be a single residential dwelling, multi-storey apartment block or an office building. They're paying that person good money. They've been to university, they've studied, they've got qualifications. They come to a council meeting and say, we recommend that we approve this. And then you've got elected officials who are there because we're obsessed with some sort of democratic process here in local council, who, as you're saying, may not have any professional qualifications, may not even be able to read the set of plans that's in front of them. And they sit there and go emotionally, through an emotive decision, we're not approving this. Or the people in my street have all got together and come to me and said, we definitely don't need apartments at the end of the street. That's great, but none of them can read plans either, and none of them have been to university in a planning course. They probably haven't read the planning scheme either. And so you've got a professional who's making a recommendation. And I just find this is quite unbelievable. In your business life or private life, if you need professional help in terms of advice, you go and pay someone for that, and it's very rare that you would pay someone for that advice or even to do something for you. And a tradie that's a specialist come and do something, then you go, oh, hang on,
I'll ask my uncle.
You're the expert.
Yeah.
Don't do it that way, because I've got an opinion about whether you should do it that way or not, or I'm not going to accept the advice that I just paid for.
So that's point number 3. Remove all planning, decisioning and authority from the councillors of local councils.
Yep. And so the other really big point we need to make here is that these people and the councils and the structure of that system have had the chance to approve and improve the locations in which we live across Perth over a long period of time. And they haven't, in good suburbs right across Perth, created the accommodation options that we needed in our marketplace to develop and evolve and mature as a city. And so we're predominantly still a single residential location or in terms of places to live.
Because the reality is infill is hard. And I think for the most part, a lot of this has not come from pure opposition to infill. It's come from a lack of intent to infill.
Yep.
And because it's so hard, you actually need a lot of intent and a lot of people on board pulling together to get this thing. It's actually really hard to build a boat if you don't know how to build a boat. And so you actually need a lot of people pulling together with the same intent to go, yeah, let's figure this out.
Yep.
And if you don't have that, then no one's going to build that boat ever.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with an apartment building. And so NIMBYism comes into it, but also just comes from a lack of cultural intent where, for the most part, it's just not necessary individually for self-interest for these things to happen. That's not to suggest, though, on a broad spectrum within the city, it actually would be of high value.
Yeah. And what I'd propose to people in terms of if you're in your location and you love where you live and you're opinionated about some density coming to that area, we all are, and I'm also worried about it, but ask yourself where you're moving to next. When the kids leave home or mum needs somewhere else to move to and they're on a 1,000 square metre block or a 500 square metre block in a big house, how are they downsizing and staying in their location? Because essentially we do not have the diversification of accommodation in the locations that everyone lives in to provide into the future, and we need to provide them as soon as possible.
Stamp duty is our number 4 point, and this is obviously not a planning thing, it's a finance treasury thing.
Yeah.
I understand that there are a number of people within the bureaucracy that actually are pretty unhappy with the situation right now. It's actually not very fair. Yep. Think about 5 years ago, a young person buying a median house price home at $450,000. The amount of stamp duty they'd have to pay to get into the market, which is a huge inhibitor to getting into the market with regards to savings, was zero, because the threshold was equal to the median house price. Now the house price is about $800,000. The stamp duty on that is about $40,000. Yep. Now, if you're using 5% scheme, you're spending $40,000 on your deposit. If you're using Keystart, it's only $16,000 as a 2% deposit, and you're paying $40,000. The headline here could really be the Treasurer of the West Australian government is ripping first home buyers off by a factor of $40,000 a pop to a total of $1 billion a year. And it's embarrassing the riches now, and it shouldn't be in a situation where the richest state is so greedy that it's taking from its poorest and ambitious people.
Yeah, it is. And the thing that's always troubled me about this is that you get nothing for it. It is an empty, non-productive, anti-productive tax. Even in the upgrader section of the market, the downgrader section of the market, it doesn't assist any of those people. And it's really difficult argument to say just abolish it, because it's a significant amount of money contributed to our tax base in the state economy. But we have to get past this concept of these thresholds we set in marketplaces or at times in the market when they get blown out of the water really quickly and they're not contributing anything. And you could essentially go out and set a below $1 million type threshold.
My preference, Brendo, would just be peg the threshold to the median house price.
Yes, so it just flexes up and down.
Yeah.
And call it the REWA number because it's been going for 30 years.
The REWA number is very much arm's length.
Yep.
Everyone watches it. You could change it every 6 months or 12 months lagged on what it was 6 months ago. And we know that if it goes down, so will the threshold.
Yep.
And we can work within that and that's fair, right?
Yep.
What we have now is just really first home buyers who can't, we spoke on our last episode in the regional market, Aurelia, Medina, Parmelia, City of Kanana, supposed to be a first home buyer's lower socioeconomic space. That's $800,000 now.
Yeah.
So there is really no real opportunity to buy a house in Western Australia anymore and not get slugged $40,000 by the state government for it. That ain't cool. And on the same side, on the back end, downsizing.
Yeah, absolutely. And so in particular, again, it victimises the downsizer that doesn't have a huge amount of money, right? So they're trying to come out of their principal place of residence, and thankfully they've made some money or some capital value out of that in the last few years. But then you go to moving to, say, a unit, and you're giving up median house price, stamp duty on that's going to cost you 30 or 40 grand as well. And you're just giving right at the time of your life when you need to make sure that you preserve as much funds as you can to live on and not be a burden on society. Why would you be giving that back to the state government?
The state government makes an argument. Why are we giving incentives to people who already have a lot of equity or cash? Look, some don't. The point is, who cares? Yeah. What we're actually focusing on here is improving mobility. Yes. Because it's actually not about the downsizer. Yep. It's about getting them out the way of that quarter-acre block so a developer can go build 4 houses for a first-home buyer, providing supply so that number doesn't go from 400 to 800 to 1.2 in the next couple of years. You stop people from moving out the way, you stop their mobility, then you stop the people who really need it getting an opportunity at the bottom end of the continuum.
And
so it doesn't matter.
Talked about less than 2,000 single residential houses on the market. This would create more supply because it would speed up decision making.
I know many agents have asked this question. How many properties would you have on the market right now if downsizers were able to be mobile? And most of them have come back with a multiple of 4 to 5 times the listings they have.
Yes.
Imagine if you did that to the stock on market right now.
Yeah.
Now you hit balanced market.
Yep. And a more liquid market gives people more options. Yep.
So again, it's that greed from the Treasury in the state government right now that is causing huge issues of mobility, not to mention that labour-hungry works that are being done right now that continually add to the cost inflation of building new supply in the first place. It is a huge double whammy right now. Not only are all these capital works increasing the cost of housing in the first place, new construction, by simply competitive demand.
Yeah.
We're then slugging people when prices go up with duties as well.
Yes.
Jeez, man. Have your cake and eat it too. It's exactly what's going on right now.
Yeah.
And it's at the detriment of young people and downsizers.
Yep.
Next one, Airbnbs. I thought it was worth having a chat about this, although we fleshed it out a little bit on the regional podcast that we did recently.
Yep.
There is an argument to suggest that the carrot rather than stick incentive on paying people to turn their Airbnb into a long-term incentive hasn't really worked.
Yeah.
It's been a drop in the ocean. There are people calling for real reform here and taxing Airbnbs to try and disincentivize them from Airbnbs to go back into the long-term market.
Yeah.
I'm open to hearing a counter-argument on this, Brendo. What is it?
Yeah, so it's really interesting here that the market moved so quickly to embrace change, to embrace technology, and at its most stark, it's greed, i.e. you're looking for the highest rental return that you can get out of an asset that you own. But who can blame people for going, hey, look, this is relatively easy for me to set up. It's less risky than some of the other options I've got. I happen to own a property in a great location that other people would like to share in, and I've worked out in the marketplace that they'll pay X dollars per week to rent my place as a holiday home, whether it be a one-bedroom unit through to a luxury house. And I'm deciding that's the choice I'm going to make with my asset. And then obviously the long-term rental market takes it out of that marketplace. There's some other little nuances here. The person that owns the house then gets to use it plus make a rental return on it if it's their holiday home. That was difficult to do prior to the Airbnb type technology. So then You come back to trying to work out regulation around this to control it. Cities like New York, or as big as New York, have tried to solve this problem, and they're still struggling to really get their policy right, other than just going, it's banned. You're not going to do it because it affects the level of accommodation available in our city too severely.
And that has a detriment to tourism and the multiplier on GST receipts and everything as well.
Yeah, exactly. And having been in New York with the family, it wasn't a very big hotel room that we had to share. I think we got a 22 square metre hotel room with myself and my wife and my 2 kids.
It's been more expensive than the Airbnbs in Dunsborough.
There's some local councils that have got this right in saying, look, it needs to be a managed location, the situation where you've got the homeowner living there and they might be renting out, say, their granny flat, so that they can make sure that you are providing extra accommodation in the location.
That is extra. That isn't robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Yeah. And then zones within local councils. One that I know is prevalent would be the streets around the central piece of Cottesloe Beach there, where there are a large amount of single like bed sits and 1-bedroom units that they're within a zone of certain streets, and they are allowed to be Airbnb'd within that area. And so potentially you do that across some other local councils. Certainly there needs to be some sort of regulation to create some supply in that longer-term marketplace, longer-term rental marketplace. But it's really difficult to regulate and get it correct.
I think, yeah, there are some really strong counter-arguments to disincentivizing Airbnb. Some can say it's a scourge on the market. I think it's a structural shift in the market that we haven't responded to. And that response really should have been, if we're going to be pulling out a bunch of long-term rentals to put into the short-term rental space, all right, that serves a different demand, then we need to be replacing it with new supply in that space. It's a structural shift that maximises economies but causes pain in that growth of it in the first place.
Yeah.
Let's get on to number 6 and talk student accommodation.
Yep.
We've seen quite a bit of it coming up on the terrace and up on Wellington Street and around ECU. That's fantastic to see.
Yeah. Uni Lodge has just opened.
Yep. And Curtin as well.
Yep.
Do we need more of it?
Yeah, look, this is an interesting concept in that it just creates supply in our marketplace. I'm not an economist. I can't work you through the concept here of exact numbers around how many student accommodation beds we need to supply to solve the greater problem around accommodation in Perth. But at the moment, we're constructing about 2,500 student accommodation beds just within the Perth CBD there. That's across a few projects. So Uni Lodge just finished. There's one at 609 Wellington Street, and then there's Urban Place out the back of the RAC Arena.
That's a lot more apartments than we're constructing across all of Perth for the long-term ownership market.
Yep. So this is a more economical construction. By that I mean it doesn't need things like subterranean parking and or car parking potentially at all, because the concept is that the students aren't rolling up in cars. Little things that I heard from builders recently, you can get your bathroom accommodation or pod constructed off-site, so might be in a factory in Perth or even in China, and you can slot that into your building, and how's this? You can have it as a step-up design because of the design of student accommodation and the proposed person who's using it, as opposed to if that was a long-term residential apartment, it needs to be a step-down design because of planning and building regulation requirements. So that makes a slight difference in design and a huge difference in cost in terms of how you can put the building together. So what we've found in our marketplace here is capital, number one, to be able to get these projects out of the ground. And it's international, it's both local and international.
It's available,
capital.
Isn't it?
Yeah, that capital's coming in.
It's the super funds that are really pushing this stuff.
Yep, and some overseas cash as well. And then builders that are skilled in actually building this type of accommodation, not to bypass the designers who have come up with some really good designs for this type of stuff. And then obviously the end user demand. So we've built ECU in the city there, 10,000 students and staff coming to use that facility into the future. And so what better place to put the accommodation than right there in the CBD? And this is an economy-changing project. We're diversifying the Perth CBD economy and the WA economy by bringing a university to the CBD and then the accommodation and i.e. the users of that to the CBD, and it will change the face of the CBD for years to come.
Do we need more of it? These are our policies of how we fix things. Do we have enough of it? We've got a lot of students coming on an annual basis at the moment. Is this what we know is they're still sucking up a lot of our rental market?
Yes. Yeah, so we do need more of it. There's some more coming in Northbridge, some more coming at UWA down into Nedlands there. By the look of me, it needs to come in hundreds of beds at a time. So the Sarona Capital building, the Uni Lodge building, that development has 736 beds in it. That's a huge amount of accommodation to bring into marketplace. whilst everyone's going, why are we doing this? We're in an international competition here in the education industry to compete against Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane and overseas marketplaces to bring students to our marketplace. And
essentially Asian students. We're up against Canada, America and East Coast to get Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Singaporean students.
Yep. And this drives our economy, okay? So the average person, why do we want the students in our marketplace? Makes our universities viable in terms of them paying their way, but it also makes our retail in the city really viable. Suddenly we're going to have good cafes, restaurants, pubs, bars to eat and drink in. It makes our city more vibrant and makes it a much nicer place for all of us to live in.
So is the current fiscal setting incentivizing enough student accommodation? Should there be land set aside by the state government to say, hey, who wants to build here? Discounted price, infrastructure, sort of stuff that's already happening, really.
Yeah, so far, it would seem to me that the marketplace has worked it out. We don't need government incentive to be thrown at a developer that's going to do student accommodation. That incentive would be better thrown at, say, apartment developers that are providing long-term accommodation.
Okay, so it sounds like the scorecard there is fairly balanced, to be honest.
Well, we've set out a vision and we're executing the vision and it's working, and it's an example of where we can actually get something done in this city, and we've built it. We just need the people to come now.
Keep doing it. Number 7, we saw the housing diversity pipeline 1, 2 and 3 now. This is essentially where the state government through DevWA and other agencies like Department of Education look at their books and go, hey, we got this land that we don't use. Who wants to buy it off us? They put it up for tender. What we do know, though, is that's been quite restrictive and quite restricted to land that is ready to go in some instances or easily developable.
Yep.
Doesn't need a scheme amendment. I think we know there are still a number of lots out there on remnant government land that maybe need a bit of planning to go, but certainly if that did happen would open up massive tracts of land still. So we think there needs to be a HDP 4, Housing Diversity Pipeline 4, which opens it up even further. It doesn't restrict it to ready to develop. It actually just helps build out the bandwidth of DevWA, which I think is drowning under its own demand in the first place. Let local developers go out there and take the risk and add supply themselves.
Yeah. And so the government had a scheme there that is being used at the moment by developers, but it hasn't been successful. So really what we're thinking here, evolve it, change the rules a bit, make it easier for a developer to become the preferred proponent is the terminology on some of these sites. I think in terms of connecting this back with John Kerry and Rita Satt's idea of the transit-oriented development that they're coming up with, you expand that out to some other locations. So remnant government land, remnant local government land, all over Perth in really good suburbs close to good infrastructure. If people think about, and they're in their cars now driving around, you don't have to go that far down the street to find some pieces of land that are relatively significant, that have some local or state government connection, that is sitting there having done nothing for a very long period of time. It might be, I've got a lot of examples for you, but the old power station in East Perth, there's a whole massive part of land sitting there that's doing absolutely nothing for years. They've tried to fix it. It's been remediated. We could be putting short-term accommodation there, essentially dongers for construction workers. Here's your preferred accommodation for you guys to live in so that you can help us build our city up. My other favourite one is good old North Freo. I used to live in North Freo, the train line between Victoria Street Station and North Fremantle train station. It's the old marshalling yards. It sits and looks at the ocean. I cannot believe that in a city of 2.3 million people that we don't do something with that land. Turn it into a park, but put some accommodation around it. The edge of parkland in Perth, and I know people are going to jump down the radio and want to kill me for this one, but there's tracts of Bowl Park where on the edge of Bowl Park there is remnant bushland there. Could we build some accommodation? We did it in Perry Lakes. You build some sort of density on the edge of parkland to create a lifestyle opportunity for people. And I'm not doing this for return. I'm doing this concept for providing accommodation in good places,
mobility,
in good locations where people would like to actually live. You might not have to knock something down to make it happen. And I think back to the North Fremantle argument. I went to those protests to have a look at how many people rolled up, people running around saying you can't develop this. And I get that back then we thought it was for all the rich people and some of the designs were not that great. We just need to get better with the design and the planning policy. Make some of that accommodation affordable. It's on train lines, right? the access for transport is fantastic. In fact, that whole train line from Perth to Fremantle, you could nearly bury the thing and build accommodation on the whole thing. So,
Brendo, that's big. That's
anyway.
Big. Well, I think we've spent $14 billion sending train stations out to the edges of Perth.
Yep.
You could have spent less than that sinking the Freo line.
Yep. And
that's a lot of land.
You look around every big city in the world, guess what? Their train transport is underground, and we could have built a trench like we did in Subiaco and just put the thing in there and build on top of it. Who knows? Maybe that would work. I'm sure there's some fantastic planners and architects that would come up with a good solution there. And it's not over. Like, the land's still sitting there. Obviously, you need to deal with the Public Transport Authority in doing that, and that would be probably very difficult.
Brendo, there's 7 ideas pre-Christmas that we've come up with. Some of them aren't new. Some of them haven't been thought about to the deepest extent, but a lot of them have. And a lot of them have been thought about by people who think about this even more than us.
Yep.
And it's time to start acting on it. It's time to get with the times, update our local government situation, update our stamp duty situation, improve the culture around what is essentially what I think a wartime crisis situation that we've been talking about this podcast now for 7 years this week.
Yes, it's crazy, isn't it? And I would encourage everyone to engage with that concept of the education economy that's coming into the CBD there, because we can use that as the example of the state government, the federal government had a vision there. Developers have brought private money to it as well, and it will result in a more vibrant CBD for Perth into the future.
Mate, thanks a lot again for this year. 7 years we've been doing this together.
Wow.
Congratulations.
Congratulations to you for building the pod.
Who would have thought?
I always get fantastic feedback. So, congratulations to yourself, mate, on doing an amazing job.
Thank you. Thanks for supporting it, and thanks for everyone who listens every year. If you've got some great ideas, I know there are a lot of very smart minds that listen to this podcast. Send them in. Maybe you might even want to be on the pod yourself. Cheers.
Thanks, mate.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Perth Property Show. If you've only just joined the conversation, you can catch up by heading over to our website, perthpropertyshow.com.au, subscribing to the podcast, or joining our Facebook page. Don't forget to tune in next Monday at 7 a.m. for more expert insights, local analysis, and suburb spotlights. Happy hunting!